Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Offsite channel. We've been on the summer holidays and haven't posted a video for quite some time. So this is podcast number 3, and we welcome Gerard McCaughey. Yeah, today I've got Gerard McCaughey with us today on the Offsite channel, and we've got a few discussion points to have with him. But first of all, I guess what we'll be looking to do is, for those of you that don't know you, although you are very active on LinkedIn particularly, if we could maybe give the listeners, viewers, a bit of a background about yourself, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose my family history in offsite construction goes back just nearly 60 years, believe it or not. My dad was a carpenter, went to the United States, discovered homes being built out of wood frame, came back to Ireland in the early 1960s, and set up what was probably the first offsite company in Ireland at the time called IJM. And then subsequently, that went on to be, and still there. I'm proud to say that all three businesses that my family's been involved in offsite construction on both sides of the world are all still in business today. So there's been a long legacy. I then went to college, did a thesis on the offsite industry for my degree.
All right.
And my dad, that was back in 1982. My dad at that point in time had left IJM, and I was actually living in California at the time as a just as a young guy who'd come out of college. He contacted me one day and said, "That report you wrote in college, did you believe it was true?" And I said to my dad, I can't even really remember writing it, but as to whether or not it was true, I mean, I don't think I ever wrote anything that I didn't think was the truth. Whether I was well enough informed or not, I'm not sure, but I didn't think I was writing anything that wasn't true.
Yeah.
He sent it to me in California. He said, "You read it. If you think it's true, why don't you come back here, put your money where your mouth is, and let's have a go at this." And 3 months later, I got on a plane, flew back to Ireland, and we set up with my brother and another guy by the name of Jim McBride, set up a company called Century Homes. And the base of the thesis was that you could build an internationally successful offsite company out of Ireland. And I was proud to say that 15 years later, that company was the largest unit producer of offsite components or offsite buildings in Europe. We were doing around 8,000 homes a year in 2005, and subsequently sold that business to Kingspan and stayed on in 2008, then moved to the United States. And probably what a lot of this is about, came here. It was the middle of a recession, looking at an industry that was, where pretty much 95% of all the homes were being built out of wood framing, and yet 95% of those were being stick framed on site. And I, as a European, I'm looking at this going, this is going back to the Stone Ages here. What are these people at? And then listening to all the complaints about labor and quality and everything else, going, well, why are you doing what you're doing? But the market was in recession, bided my time, and then waited until the market came around, and then subsequently, about 5 years ago, decided to set up a company called Integra to basically bring, and I emphasize this, European or British Irish style offsite construction to the United States market. Not what was currently here, but what we're more familiar with in the UK and Ireland. And looked all around the US as to where was the best location. And ironically, I was living in California. We decided on California, but not because I was living here, but because that's where the biggest constraints on the industry happen to be. And I live in Southern California, but we decided to set the plant up in Northern California because even within California, that's where we decided was where there was the biggest need. And so we set the plant up in Modesto, pretty much to service that, what they would call up here the Greater Bay Area, the San Francisco, Silicon Valley, all that region. And they would also refer to the Central Valley. That's a huge home building area in the United States.
Yeah,
that's how we got to where we are today.
Oh, cool. So you'd mentioned the recession and what you're in your opening gambit there. So the drum's been beaten again about recession, and so the question from you, from a man that's experienced that as a business owner, is how do you feel that the offsite industry can continue to grow with the recession that's been bandied about again? I'm just be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, this, I suppose, for me is interesting. Before I even came onto this morning, I read an article by there's a great publisher over here called John McManus. And it's called the Builders Daily. If any of your readers want to go and look at it, if you're interested in the US, because the Builders Daily. So, but he was actually talking this morning about, the impact, the looming recession, and there's no doubt that the rise in interest rates is having an impact on home sales. But I think you need to put that in context. If you go back and you look at, say, the period around 2005, which was the peak of the boom over here and the peak of the boom in Europe, they were building about 2.2 million homes in the United States at that point in time, which was way overbuilt. The 30-year average is 1.5 million homes per year. Right, like take that number, 1.5 million homes per year. When we entered the market, we believed there was an opportunity when the market was at 1.2 million homes per year, and it stayed at that for 2 or 3 years, and then it suddenly ramped up through 1.5, and the run rate. So think about this now: the run rate was at 1.7 million homes, and that's only 6 months ago. The actual run rate was at 1. Now what they're predicting is that the market's going to come back down to somewhere between 1.4, 1.5 million homes. So what people are talking about a recession is not so much, I think, in terms of volume of recession. It's the sudden decline, but it's not the fact that there isn't going to be a volume of homes that are still required to be built. So I was sort of the view when you talk about the recession in the US is it's how deep is it going to be and how real is that terminology recession. I'm not sure that it's going to be quite as bad, or we should be using it that. It's certainly going to be a downturn. There's certainly going to be a leveling off, and it'll probably weed a few people out of the industry. But I don't think, first of all, the recession is going to be anything akin to what we had before. You also must remember in the US that over the last decade, there have built up a deficit of approximately 4 million homes. So it's not that there isn't a requirement for the homes.
Yeah.
At the moment, is people are finding it difficult to pay for them because of the interest rate rises. But even this week, we had inflation figures come in that show that inflation is now, well, it's only one reading, but it may have topped. So that's going to impact the 30-year mortgage rate over here. So I'm just not so sure that recession is the right word to use. It may be a technical recession, 2 quarters of negative growth, but I'm not so sure it's going to be a major downturn.
Yeah, well, that's good because I guess the previous one was directly had housing involved in it, wasn't it? It was to do with bad debt, and whereas this might be, obviously the fuel costs. We had the reported fuel cost of the energy cap coming up in the UK on this side, and it's over £4,000 a year is what they're going to say the cost for energy is over here, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, but again,
but if there was any, I guess.
So I was going to say, in the US, as much as they complain about the cost of energy, it's extremely cheap over here. Although they complain about it as if it's the most expensive thing on the planet, but in reality, energy costs are extremely cheap in the US.
Okay,
so where do you see the offsite industry growing more? Do you see it growing quicker in multifamily or in residential?
That's the great question, and I would say it also leads into another point, Greg, that in the US, I mean, why is offsite not taken off more here over the years? And I think part of the problem, why have companies been so afraid to invest in technology? And they keep talking about the cyclicality of the industry and the downturns and how they're afraid to make those kind of investments. Part of it comes back to your question, is that what you'll find over here is a very, very strict delineation between single family and multifamily. And when it comes to panelized over here, you've seen a lot of people go and target only one sector of it, which is the multifamily, and they leave the single family alone. And the reason for that is because of the technical complexity, not from an engineering point of view, but the technical complexity of managing the variations that exist within supplying a single family home builder over here. Because the homes are, this is another, I think, important point to note to people in Europe. When you look at a unit, when I was running Century Homes in Ireland, we referred to a unit as being 100 square meters of a building, because approximately 100 square meters or 1,150 square feet was the typical size of the first-time buyer home, the average home that was being manufactured for the UK or Ireland. In the United States, the equivalent size is 2,500 square feet. Right? So every unit we refer to here is 2.5 units by the UK standards. So when I say if we were producing 1,000 units per year, we're actually producing 2,500 units by UK Irish standards.
Okay.
But where that gets complicated is that there's far more variation in the designs allowed by US home builders compared to UK or Irish home builders.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's colossally more difficult from a technical point of view to manage all of the changes or the variations that each builder requires. Very few of them have there is one and they market on. I mean, Lennar market on what's called everything included EI. They basically say we're going to give you everything in the house, so you don't really need to change anything, and that's pretty simple. But the rest of them have so much variation that it's difficult to get into single family. But the difficulty is if you're a manufacturer and you're trying to only make your economics work on the basis of supplying multifamily. The problem is multifamily offsite production is very lumpy. So you try putting it through a factory and get it right, it's extremely lumpy. You need to be able to insert single family into the mix, which is one of the lessons that the UK and Irish European manufacturers have. They can actually adapt and vary and move from in and out of single family to multifamily basically at the drop of a hat.
Yeah,
keeps their flow going. That doesn't really exist in the US, and so you get this lumpy production. So, to the question there, I would say is, I think that multifamily is probably going to be a larger proportion of the growth in offsite construction over the next few years. But I think that in the long term, single family is going to be where the major growth opportunity is. But that's going to involve the far greater use of design and information and technology to be able to produce those elements. It doesn't matter once you get the information to the factory floor, because the machine doesn't care. I mean, a Weinmer or Randeck machine doesn't care what's going down it once you can give it the information. So the key has been able to give it the data to be able to provide the product.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for standard detailing and party walls, floors, and panel heights and everything like that to try and keep it as similar as possible, rather than having to do bespoke detailing on every project, isn't it? That's,
Yeah, it takes up a lot of time and effort, and in many cases, it's being driven by the sales guy. And there's no real point. I mean, will the customer ever notice the detail, the change, the minute change? But actually, it has a major impact on the manufacturer. I might argue, no, it wouldn't, but that's the way the industry has developed here.
So, looking at your company, when you came across to the United States, what were the biggest challenges you faced trying to implement a European style operation in the US?
Wow, I mean, that would require this show to go on for probably 7 days continuously to honestly answer. But I think from my own perspective and the team that I put together, our perspective, the biggest question we could not answer ourselves is, why are they not already doing it?
Okay.
Right. That was, here we are in the land that think about this. The people of the United States put a man on the moon 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And today they're building homes like it's 200 years ago. And I mean, the dichotomy here, it's just incredible when you think about it. And we kept saying, there's something wrong here. We're missing something. There's no way they're doing this because that they can't do it. Technically, it's been done in Europe every single day. I've been personally doing it for 30 years. How is this a problem? Well, what we've sort of found out was that the biggest problem in the US to the implementation of offsite construction is not a technological problem. It's an attitude problem, and it's a problem with an industry that has. See, what we don't have in Britain or Ireland is we don't have a legacy of framing contractors who can go out in a pickup truck with a bale of lumber and a skill saw start cutting up from a set of 2D drawings somebody's home, somebody's castle. We don't have that, right? It just doesn't exist. But that's what you have in the US. You have so that when you listen to offsite companies in the UK and Ireland, they're always complaining about the concrete industry and the influence and the power that it has, rightly or wrongly. I mean, we can have that as another discussion. But in the US, the power lies with the framers. So if you think about it, you want to go out to a job site and convince a home builder to switch to a more efficient way of getting his homes delivered. But no matter how much manufacturing you do in the factory, you still rely on the framer to erect the house. We call them erectors in Britain and Ireland. They're called framers over here. But you're sort of asking the same person who gets to stick frame the complete house to do less to put up your pre-manufactured elements from the factory. To use an American expression, that's like asking a turkey to vote for Thanksgiving. In their right, they see it as a threat to them. So just as the concrete industry sees wood framing as wood-fired offsite framing in the UK and Ireland as a threat to them, the traditional framing, wood framing industry, stick framers over here see offsite as a threat to them. Generally, that's not all of them. And that's where the key to all of this in terms of the future lies. But the vast majority of them, as it exists at this moment, see offsite as a threat, a challenge to them. And because you have to ask them to help you put it up, what you run into is this battle of them completely and intentionally mispricing the erect portion of the wood framing to make the stick framing look cheaper, use that word, than building using an offsite solution. And so it comes down then to cost. And that's but it's the framer it's the framer who's in between that you have to find a way to bypass that.
Yeah, it's either have your own squads, I guess, or see the problem is that one question
is you have to find what we refer to as enlightened framers.
Okay.
And they do exist. They're the smarter guys. They're the guys who actually see the future, and they actually see. This is the key to this. Those people see offsite construction not as being a threat to them, but being as additional revenue source to them. Because if you think of a market that 1.5 million homes per year over a 30-year period, 95% of that being wood frame, there's no way that in the next 100 years that offsite wood frame is going to take over the whole market. So for these people, what they're looking at is they can do both. They can still go out and service their offsite, their stick framing clients, and yet they can still do work for an offsite company where they can actually, as one of them have said to us, make more money per square foot because when you bring it down to time on site using an offsite solution than they can actually stick framing with far less risk. So it's finding the enlightened framers is the biggest challenge that I would see to the growth of offsite construction in the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about challenges you've experienced here? Surprises. What have you encountered here in the last 24 months, say, just picking a time frame here, unexpectedly, challenges, surprises?
You've still got COVID in the middle of all of that 24 months. So, I mean, one of the big that was a huge surprise. And ironically, I mean, all the cuts went in on March 16th, the day before St. Patrick's Day, in the US, and that pretty much halted the construction industry for a period of time. But what was a big surprise though, that was how rapidly that turned around, and I think that's on both sides of the Atlantic. When the restrictions come off, I mean, the uptake, and in particular in offsite construction, because here's an interesting statistic. So during the height of the COVID restrictions, our output pretty much went down to I'll not say zero, but very low levels, because construction sites were being shut down. Demand was down. Potential purchasers couldn't get to buy the homes too easily. That means a lot of work happened to ease that up. But at the very beginning, there was a lot of slowdown.
Yeah.
But despite that, from the minute that the restrictions were put in place, our inquiry levels went up 350%.
Really?
So we saw this happening. Decrease in output, increase in inquiries. And we were actually saying ourselves, there's something very funny happening here. Now, what is it? And what part of the conclusion that we came up to, and again, this is just our view, was that builders actually had more time during the downturn to actually look at new systems. When you're in the flow and you're selling stuff and you're building stuff and your system's working, if it's not broken, why fix it? But all of a sudden you had this stop, and we were still continuing to market. And I think builders took the time to look more seriously at what was going on. And you had all the, there was a lot more fear then about the amount of people on site, restrictions, staying 6 feet apart, which offsite ways solved those problems. And so I think it generated a lot more detailed interest in offsite construction. And then the minute that the COVID restrictions came off, the demand just, it went vertical very, very quickly. And that was a dramatic surprise. I mean, we were not prepared for how quickly the turnaround actually happened.
A pleasant surprise too, indeed. Very pleasant.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it caught everybody, but certainly that was, in the last 24 months, that was the biggest surprise that we had. That we went from, I think, of a position where there was steady growth to just completely. A lot of the arguments that were being made against offsite construction started to dissipate and go away. And I think that was a big benefit of COVID to us.
Yeah, the material cost, and that's inclusive of material costs going up at the rate that it did as well. You still had that level of growth. So
yeah. I mean, well, you also have. I mean, I know you have this in the UK as well, but I mean, I think Chris would probably understand this. I mean, the problem over here, one of the biggest problems over here, probably the biggest problem in the US construction industry currently, is the lack of labor.
Okay.
That is, without a doubt, everybody, and it doesn't. No, and that also impacts manufacturers as well as it impacts framing on site or the trades on site. But if you look at currently they say there's about 400,000 jobs shortage, or people, more opportunities than there are people applying for jobs in the industry.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the demographics and you see that the industry now has got the highest proportion of people coming into the retirement age that it's ever had. And the statistic is that for every one person who enters the US construction industry, 5 are retiring.
Really?
So we're at this tipping point now where if something doesn't change, there's going to be a huge problem coming into the future here. And I think this is probably, to say everything, timing is everything in life. I would say if you look at the next 5 to 10 years in the US, and if you ask builders, even the ones who are rigidly sticking to stick frame, and you ask them, do you think homes are going to be built the same way in 10 years that they're being built now? I think the majority of them, I think there has been a research done this, the majority would say no, there's going to be change. So I think we're at the tipping point here at the moment, and a lot of that's being driven by the labor issues.
Yeah, well, I know that we do have that over here, obviously with the Brexit situation as well, with a lot of the Europeans vacating. So we do. It seems to be a global problem.
Well, I think the UK is. No, I won't get that, but maybe there's listening. But I mean, the UK has shot itself on both feet there. I mean, as an Irish person, I would be very pro-European, and I mean, to cut off the supply of labour from Europe, to me, I just don't see this. I see the problems.
So I guess we're coming to the end here, and I've just wondered how I've got your site up here, and I just wondered if you could tell us about yourself in regards to your website that you have.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm doing now is helping a lot of people who are now, and there's a colossal amount of interest in the whole offsite industry in the US, and I think a lot of it being driven by all those issues we discussed, in particular labor, but also I think a lot of it being driven now by the fact that when we brought the European style offsite construction to the US, I think there were a lot of naysayers and disbelievers that thought it won't work, it can't happen. And yet it is working and it is happening. And you're now starting to see major investments by home builders and building supply companies into the whole area of offsite construction. I mean, the most famous one being is that Pulte, which is one of the largest home builders in the US, acquired ICG in Jacksonville in Florida, which uses a lot of Weinmann equipment, European style manufacturing, and they've announced that they're opening their second factory. You have a company in Texas called Future Frame USA that invested in Weinmann equipment. There's a lot of people now, I think, are aware that what they thought was offsite construction in the US up to now wasn't offsite construction. And so what I'm trying to do now is bring and encourage those who want to truly get into, to use that expression, the European style of offsite construction, which is a more holistic view of the building.
Yeah.
How to help them achieve that transition, both as manufacturers or setting up companies, or those who are, I'm dealing with a lot of building supply companies now who are looking at how they change their products to best suit the offsite industry as it develops.
Yeah.
So, and I would say to any of the UK guys over there, guys, if you've been successful in the UK, this is a massive opportunity for you over here in the US. It really is a massive opportunity. And I'd be delighted to help you make your inroads into this market. But it is a huge opportunity over here.
Yeah.
This is the market of the future.
Absolutely. Well, it's good. It's good to have a contact over there in yourself, Gerard. That's trailblazing over there. So I think it's been great being able to catch up with you anyway for the first time. It's been a while. We've seen you on LinkedIn. I don't know if are you on any other platforms? Is it primarily on LinkedIn?
No, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. So you'll see now, but primarily I use LinkedIn to get the information out. It being the most, and again, I would say to people that's probably the one that's the platform that's most misunderstood by the construction industry. It has dramatic influence, or you can have dramatic influence if you use it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us, and we hope to welcome you back in the future, hopefully.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Very informative. Much appreciated.
Thank you.